Welcome to Owls in the Family, Chapter 1, Part 2 today. Last time, the question at the end of Part 1 was, what do you call a group of crows? And quite a few of you found out the answer by Googling it, and that was just fine. And the answer was a murder. So when we have a group of crows, they are called a murder of crows. You might want to think about why the person who picked that name picked it. Maybe listening to the sounds of the crows when they're all together. They do sound kind of scary and a little bit like they are committing a murder. But there are tons of different names for different groups of animals. So maybe you have heard of some of these. I'm pretty sure you would have heard of a swarm of bees. Then a pack of dogs. That one's pretty familiar to us. A litter of puppies. Some of these you might have never heard of, and I have never heard of them as well. They're not used very often. A shrewdness of apes. I've never heard of that one. A quiver of cobras. Sounds really interesting. A business of ferrets. All of those are not really used very often. I like this one. An army of frogs. That's a great one. A smack of jellyfish. I have heard of this one before. A barrel of monkeys or a troop of monkeys. And because owls are my favorite, I know this one. A parliament of owls is what you call a group of owls together. And there's a few more on here as well. One that I just like the sound of is a crash of rhinos, because of course they would crash into something. A stench of skunks. That makes sense because skunks are stinky. A knot of toads. And then there's one that we knew from before, a pod of whales. I think most people know this one too, a pack of wolves. So if you're interested in that, just go back in the video and read some of those. They're really interesting. All right, in the last part that we read, the boys saw a great horned owl, and I wanted to take just a little bit of a look at this great horned owl with you. He is a very large owl, beautiful owl. And if you look at the different parts of the owl, there's a little diagram here. Now, what we would call the claws on an owl are actually called talons. That's what those are called. And they are very long and very sharp, and they're as dangerous as a knife. Up here, people think that these are horns, and the owl is called Great Horned Owl, but those are not horns at all. All those are is tufts of feathers. So you might want to think about why the owl would have feathers that look like horns. What would that allow it to do, or how would that benefit the owl? How would that help him survive? But definitely not horns, just feathers. And of course they have a longer tail in the back, which you can't always see from the front of the picture. So that's our great horned owl right there. Now, when we were doing our nonfiction unit, one of the books that we talked about is the Who Would Win series. And in the last chapter, the boys said that owls and crows hate each other. So they are fighting against each other. And I want you to think about that. Who would win? Not just one owl versus one crow, because there's never just one crow, and there usually is only one owl, but one owl versus a murder of crows. Who do you think would come out the winner in that? So just think about for a minute, who is bigger, who is stronger, what kind of features they have that would help them in a fight. Maybe the size of the bird itself, or how many crows it would take to get rid of the owl, or for the owl to damage the crows. Think about those kinds of things. So who would win? All right, here we go. Bruce and I started to hunt for the nest. After a while, the owl got more worried about us than about the crows, and away he went. He flew low over the fields, almost touching the ground. That way the crows couldn't dive on him. If they tried it, they would shoot past him and crash into the dirt. So there's a picture of the boys following behind as the crows are chasing the owl. There wasn't any owl's nest in the bluff that after all, but we didn't worry. We knew the nest would have to be in some bluff not too far away. All we had to do was look. We looked in different bluffs all afternoon. We found 7 crow's nests, a red-tailed hawk's nest, and 3 magpies' nests. I tore the seat out of my trousers, or my pants, that's another word for pants, climbing to the hawk's nest, and we both got Russian thistles in our sneakers, our shoes, so we had sore feet. It got hotter and hotter, and we were so thirsty I could have eaten a lemon myself, except that Bruce didn't have any more. It was past supper time when we started back towards the railroad. By then we were pretending we were a couple of Arabs lost in the desert. Our camels had died of thirst, and we were going to die too, unless we found some water pretty soon. Listen, Bruce said. There's an old well over at Haltane Corner. If we cut over past Barney's Slough to the section road, we can get a drink. Too late, I told him. Goodbye, old pal, old sheik. I am doomed. Go on and leave me lay. Ah, nuts, said Bruce. I'm thirsty. Come on, let's go. So we cut past Barney's Slough, and there were about 1,000 mallard ducks on it. They all jumped into the air as we went by, and their wings made a sound like a freight train going over a bridge. Wish I had my dad's gun, said Bruce. But I was wondering why on the prairies they call lakes and ponds sloughs. I still don't know why, but that's what they're called in Saskatoon. There was one big bluff between us and Haltane Corner. It was too far to go around it, so we walked right through it. Anyway, it was cooler in among the trees. When we were about halfway through, I spotted a crow's nest in a big old cottonwood. Bet it's empty, I said to Bruce. But the truth was that I was just too hot and tired to climb any more trees. Bruce felt the same way, and we walked past. But I took one last look up at it, and there, sticking over the edge of the nest, was the biggest bunch of tail feathers you ever saw. My heart jumped right into my throat, and I grabbed Bruce by the shirt and pointed up. It was a great horned owl, all right. We kept as quiet as we could so as not to scare her, and then we looked around the bottom of the tree. There were bits of rabbits and gophers and lots of owl pellets. When owls catch something, they eat the whole thing, bones and fur and all. Then after a while, they burp and spit out a ball of hair and bones. That's an owl pellet. By gang, we found it, Bruce whispered. I found it, I said. Okay, said Bruce, you found it then. So how about you climbing up and seeing how many young ones are in it? Nothing doing, old pal, I replied. I found the nest, so if you want one of the owlets, you climb up and have a look. Neither of us was keen to climb that tree. The old owl was sticking close to her nest, and you can't always tell how fierce an owl is going to be. They can be pretty fierce sometimes. Say, said Bruce after a while, why don't we just leave her be for now? Might scare her into leaving the nest for good if we climbed up. What say we get Mr. Miller and come back tomorrow? Mr. Miller was one of our teachers. Bruce and I liked him because he liked the prairie too. He was a great one for taking pictures of birds and things. We knew he would be crazy to get some pictures of the owl, and Mr. Miller never minded climbing trees. Sure, I said, good idea. We went off to Haltane Corner and got a drink of water that tasted like old nails out of the broken pump. Then we walked on home. That night I told Dad about the owl's nest, and he looked at Mother, and all he said was, "Oh no, not owls too." And that's the end of chapter 1. In the story that we were just reading, they talked about a few things I wanted to show you some pictures of. One was the Russian thistle, which is a very prickly plant. And the boys said that they got some of those prickly Russian thistles stuck in their shoes. That hurts a lot. They would have to stop and take them out. And they also talked about the red-tailed hawk. Now, even though the story takes place on the prairies, red-tailed hawks live all over the place, and they live here, right where we live. In fact, on the way to work, when I come into school in the morning and when I drive home at night, almost every single time I see one or more of these hawks sitting on fence posts on the way home. So you may have seen a red-tailed hawk. It's just really hard to tell. You can't see that red tail unless they're flying. And then they talked about that there were thousands of mallards, the ducks that we see here, on the lake. And when they all took off, all their wings made a huge sound like a freight train. The colorful mallard duck right here is always the male. That's always the boy. And the one that's brown is the female or the girl, and she has to be able to blend in with her surroundings, especially when she's sitting on the nest, so she can hide from predators. And if you guys remember that word, hiding from predators and blending in with your surroundings is called camouflage. Now, it said that the boys looked around the bottom of the tree for bits of rabbits and gophers and also owl pellets. And during the story, the boys explain what an owl pellet is. So you can see an owl pellet will fit in your hand. You can pick these up in your hand. They are not wet. They are completely dry. You cannot get sick from holding them. The owl uses all the yucky parts of the rat or the rodent when it swallows it. And all that it burps back up is the hair, which is dry, just like hair from a dog, and then the bones. Now, for about 10 years, I did an owl unit with my class, and we had owls that were brought in to show us, and then we got owl pellets and we dissected those. That means that we broke apart the pellet and we saw what was inside. And you can see all this black stuff here. That's the hair. But you can also see these little white things. These are little bones. And so we would find the jawbone, we would find the ribs, we would find the leg bones. And if we were really lucky, we would find a skull or sometimes even two skulls inside. And almost all the time, they were skeletons of mice and other kinds of rodents. Another kind of rodent is called a vole. That's another one that they like to eat. And once we actually found the skull and the skeleton of a small bird inside there. So owls will eat other birds as well, as long as they're small. All right. Right here it says these are the provincial and territorial birds of Canada. And you can see right over here that one of the provinces has the great horned owl as its provincial bird. It is not British Columbia. British Columbia has this as its provincial bird, the Steller's jay, which you will have seen probably. They're very loud, very noisy. And two other provinces have owls as well. So we have 3 provinces in Canada that have owls as their provincial bird, which they put on emblems like flags and so on. So if you want to, you can look that up on Google and figure out which province has the great horned owl as its provincial bird. Now, in the story, one of the boys said the great horned owl is the biggest owl of all, but that is not quite true. He thinks it's the biggest owl of all, but it isn't. So I have a few questions for you to research and look up. Which Canadian owl is the tallest? He says biggest, but biggest could be tallest or heaviest. I want you to look up which Canadian owl is the tallest. And here's a little bit of a tougher question to look up. Why do crows and owls hate each other? So see if you can find out the reason that they hate each other and always are attacking each other and getting into fights. Now, those are straightforward questions to ask. This is a deep thinking question, and this is the last question, the most important one. And I would like you to comment on this underneath in the comment section. Remember, our deep thinking questions start with why or how. Why does Dad say, "Oh no, not owls too"? Now the answer is not written for you in the text. Even if you go back and look, it won't say why Dad said that. You have to infer. That means think about dads, think about boys that collect animals and go looking for baby owls. Think about all the things you know about kids and what you know about parents. And I want you to take a good guess. Why does Dad say that? Oh no, not owls too. All right, good luck with all those questions.